In World War II, a single microscopic crack in a shell meant instant death for the gun crew. Technology couldn't find these flaws, but she could. Discover how women with yellow skin used nothing but a hammer and perfect pitch to audit 90 million rounds of ammo, by ear. July 18, 1944. 5:30 hours. The outskirts of Caen, Normandy. The ground is not just shaking, it is convulsing, heaving like the chest of a dying beast. You are standing knee-deep in the churned slurry of French clay, the air thick with a mixture of morning mist and the acrid, biting stench of cordite that coats the back of your throat like ash. Private Arthur Miller does not hear the birds because they fled hours ago. He only hears the rhythmic, mechanical scream of the 25-pounder field gun next to him. He is part of the Royal Artillery, and this morning, Operation Goodwood has unleashed the greatest bombardment of the campaign. Load, the sergeant bellows, his voice barely cutting through the cacophony. Miller grabs the brass casing. It is heavy, cold, and slick with condensation. He shoves it into the breech, the steel locking mechanism slamming shut with a metallic clack that signifies death is ready to be delivered. He steps back, gripping the lanyard. The gun barrel, hot enough to blister skin, points toward the German lines hidden in the hedgerows 2 miles away. Fire. The gun bucks violently, sliding back on its recoil spades. A sheet of flame erupts, temporarily blinding the crew. But amidst this industrial slaughter, there is a silent prayer that every artilleryman whispers, consciously or not. They pray the shell leaves the barrel. They pray it does not detonate prematurely, turning the gun crew into pink mist. And they pray that when it lands, it explodes. Because a dud is not just a waste of metal. A dud gives the enemy a second chance to kill you. Now, freeze that frame. Pause the recoil. Silence the deafening roar of the Western Front. To understand why Arthur Miller's shell flies true, to understand why it sings a high-pitched whistle of doom rather than shattering inside the gun, we have to travel back. We have to leave the mud of France and cross the English Channel, drifting into the smoky, dimly lit interior of a massive brick building in the industrial heartlands of Lancashire 2 years prior. November 1942. Royal Ordnance Factory, Kirkby, England. Here, the noise is different. It is not the chaotic boom of combat. It is a rhythmic, metallic percussion. It sounds like a grotesque orchestra tuning their instruments in a steel cathedral. Cling, cling, cling. Thud. The air here tastes different, too. It tastes of apricot and almonds, the deceptive, sweet scent of TNT powder that hangs in the air like a poisonous fog. Meet Margaret. She is 22 years old, though the fatigue etched around her eyes makes her look 30. Her hair is tucked entirely beneath a turban to keep it from turning yellow, the hallmark stain of the Canary Girls who handle the high explosives. But Margaret is not filling shells today. She is sitting on a high wooden stool in the inspection department, a long workbench stretching out before her, piled high with thousands of empty 25-pounder steel casings. She holds a small, wooden-handled hammer with a specialized metal head. To an outsider, she looks like she is simply tapping metal, over and over again. But Margaret is a virtuoso in a symphony of logistics. She is a shell tapper. You watch her pick up a casing. It is a hollow steel cylinder, primed to be filled with high explosives. If there is a hairline fracture in the steel, a crack so microscopic that the human eye cannot see it, so fine that a magnifying glass might miss it, the intense pressure of firing will cause the shell to rupture in the gun barrel. The result is a bore premature. The gun is destroyed. The crew is killed. Margaret does not look at the shell. She strikes it. Tap. A clear, bell-like B-flat rings out, sustaining for 3 seconds. It is a pure, unwavering note. It sings. She sets it in the pass pile and grabs the next one. Tap, pure tone, pass, tap, pure tone, pass. Her hands move with a blurring speed, a rhythm born of handling 3,000 shells in a 10-hour shift. She is entering a trance state, her ears tuning out the clanking of the conveyor belts and the shouting of the foreman, focusing entirely on the pitch. She is looking for the discord. She is hunting for the wrong note. Then, it happens. She lifts a shell, identical to the 10,000 before it. It looks perfect. The steel shines under the factory lights. She strikes it. Thunk. It is a dead sound. A dull, flat vibration that dies instantly. There is no ring. There is no song. To you, it sounds like hitting a bag of wet sand. To Margaret, it sounds like catastrophe. She stops. The rhythm breaks. She lifts the shell closer to her ear and taps it again. Lighter this time. Thunk. Got you, she whispers, her voice barely audible. She takes a piece of white chalk from her apron pocket and draws a thick X across the side of the casing. This shell has a flaw deep within its molecular structure, a fissure invisible to the eye but undeniable to the ear. If she had missed this beat, if she had been distracted for a fraction of a second, this piece of metal would have ended up in Arthur Miller's gun in Normandy. This is the impossible quality control of World War II. In an era before digital sensors, before ultrasound scanning, and before computer-aided design, the safety of millions of soldiers relied on the auditory acuity of women in drafty factories, listening for the music of death. They are the uncredited musicians of the war effort, and they have 90 million more shells to audit. Margaret wipes her forehead with the back of her hand. If you look closely at her skin under the harsh, hanging electric lamps, you can see the faint, jaundiced hue beginning to set in. It is not liver failure. It is the amatol. The explosive mixture of TNT and ammonium nitrate is a fine, pervasive dust that settles into the pores, dyes the hair, and stains the bedding of every woman working the line. They are the Canary Girls, and their toxic complexion is a badge of honor that comes with a price: chest pains, nausea, and the constant, metallic taste of poison. But the conveyor belt does not care about nausea. It clanks forward, a relentless river of grey steel. The foreman, Mr. Henderson, walks by. He is a man of few words, his face obscured by a layer of grime and shadow. He sees the shell with the white chalk X sitting isolated on the rejection rack. He does not smile. He does not offer a commendation. In this factory, silence is the only praise you get. He simply nods to a porter, a young boy who looks barely 16, who lugs the 40-pound dud away to be melted down and recast. Margaret is already tapping the next one. Cling. Pass. You watch the rhythm of the room. It is mesmerizing and terrifying. Rows of women, hundreds of them, stretch down the length of the drafty hall. They are sitting on benches, standing at lathes, and hunching over inspection tables. The air is cold. Heating is dangerous in an explosives factory, but the collective body heat and the friction of the machines create a humid, suffocating microclimate. To your left, another tapper, a woman named Elsie, pauses. She massages her wrist. Repetitive strain injury is the phantom enemy here. If your wrist goes weak, your strike becomes inconsistent. If your strike is inconsistent, the pitch wavers. If the pitch wavers, you might pass a dud or reject a good shell. And in 1942, with the Africa Corps pushing hard and the Eastern Front consuming ammunition by the ton, wasting a good shell is almost as sinful as shipping a bad one. Elsie catches Margaret's eye. They share a look, a fleeting, exhausted communion that says more than any conversation could. They are tired, they are cold, and they are deafened. But Elsie picks up her hammer. Tap. This auditory testing is not officially in the engineering manuals in the way you might expect. It is an acquired skill, passed down from veteran to novice. The Ministry of Supply demands perfection, but they have given these women primitive tools, a hammer and their ears. They are listening for the structural integrity of the atom lattice itself. A pure tone means the metal is continuous, a solid, unbroken vessel capable of containing the violent expansion of burning cordite. A dead tone means the metal is interrupted. It means physics will fail. The noise of the factory swells. It is shift change. The heavy iron doors at the far end of the hall slide open, letting in a blast of freezing Lancashire wind that cuts through the TNT fog. A new regiment of women marches in, looking like soldiers in headscarves and heavy aprons. They carry tin lunch pails and the weight of families waiting at home. Many of them have husbands in North Africa or brothers in the Pacific. Every shell they tap is a personal message to the front lines. Margaret stands up, her knees cracking audibly. She has tapped over 4,000 shells in this shift alone. As she hands her hammer to her relief, a woman named Joan, She leans in close to her ear. "Watch the batch from Furnace 4, Margaret says, her voice raspy. The tempering is off. They are singing flat. Joan nods, taking the seat. The transition is seamless. The music of the factory does not stop for a heartbeat. Cling, cling, cling. As Margaret walks toward the exit, stepping over cables and dodging carts of explosives, you follow her out into the bleak, grey afternoon. The factory looms behind her, a leviathan of red brick and smokestacks. From the outside, it looks like any other mill in northern England. But inside, it is a cathedral of sound, where the difference between life and death is the difference between a B-flat and a thud. She lights a cigarette, her yellow-stained fingers trembling slightly. But she does not go home yet. She stops at the gate, looking at the headlines on a discarded newspaper blowing across the cobblestones. Stalingrad holds. She knows that somewhere in Russia, or perhaps in the belly of a bomber over Berlin, a gunner is reaching for a shell. She closes her eyes for a second, listening to the distant hum of the factory, praying that her ear was true. February 15th, 1944, 900 hours. Below the monastery of Monte Cassino, Italy. The prayer Margaret whispered 2 years ago and 1,000 miles away hangs suspended in the freezing, sleet-filled air of the Italian mountains. Here, the mud is not the soft clay of France. It is a rocky, freezing slurry that sucks the heat from your boots and the will from your bones. You are standing in a gun pit with Sergeant Thomas Mac McAllister of the Royal Artillery. The objective looms above them, the great Benedictine monastery, a white fortress crowning the peak, staring down like the unblinking eye of God. The order has come down. The monastery is to be levelled. Mac's hands are cracked and bleeding from the cold. He reaches for a shell crate. The wood is stamped with black ink. ROF Kirkby. He does not know Margaret. He does not know about the amatol dust staining her skin or the ringing in her ears. To Mac, this crate is just logistics. It is a box of potential violence shipped from a home he has not seen in 3 years. He pries the lid open. The 25-pounder shells gleam dully in the grey light, coated in a thin layer of grease to protect them from the damp. "Fire mission," the radio operator screams, clutching the handset against the roar of the wind. Mac grabs a shell. It is heavy, cold, and lethal. This is the specific unit of metal Margaret tapped back in November of 42. The one that rang true, the one with the B-flat pitch. But Mac does not tap it. He does not have time for music. He trusts the physics. He trusts the supply chain. He shoves the projectile into the breech of the field gun, follows it with the brass cartridge case containing the propellant, and slams the breech block shut. This is the moment of truth. This is the lottery of manufacture. When Mac pulls that lanyard, a chemical reaction occurs in milliseconds. The cordite ignites. The pressure inside the chamber spikes from 0 to 25 tons per square inch instantly. The steel of the shell casing is subjected to violence that the human mind can barely comprehend. It must expand to create a gas-tight seal against the gun barrel's rifling, spinning the projectile at thousands of revolutions per minute. If there is a flaw, if Margaret had been tired, if she had let a thud pass as a ring, this is where the physics of failure takes over. A hairline fracture acts as a stress concentrator. The immense pressure of the burning gas seeks out that weakness like water finding a crack in a dam. The metal does not just break, it shatters. The shell detonates not over the German paratroopers on the mountain, but right here, inside the gun. It is called a bore premature. It turns the field gun into a fragmentation grenade, killing Mac and his entire crew instantly. You hold your breath as Mac yanks the lanyard. Crack thump. The gun recoils violently, sliding back in the mud. The barrel smokes, but the breech holds. The steel integrity, verified by a woman's ear in Lancashire, maintains its cohesion. You look up. High above, whistling through the sleet, the shell sings. It is a distinct, tearing sound, like ripping silk. It clears the ridge. Seconds later, a plume of grey smoke erupts on the slopes of Monte Cassino. "Good shot, reload," Mac yells. But not everyone is so lucky. 300 yards down the line, a sudden, discordant crump shakes the ground, different from the rhythmic firing of the battery. It is a hollow, wet sound. You turn to look. Smoke is rising not from the muzzle of a gun, but from the breach. Men are shouting. Medics are sprinting through the mud, slipping and sliding, their Red Cross armbands stark against the drab olive of the valley. A gun crew has just been erased. Maybe it was a fuse malfunction. Maybe it was dirt in the barrel. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a shell that did not ring true, a piece of metal with a secret flaw that slipped past a tired inspector in a factory running 24-hour shifts. The reality of the shell tappers' war is becoming clear to you now. It is not just about manufacturing quotas. It is a direct, invisible lifeline connecting the hands of the women in England to the lives of the men in Italy. Every chalk mark Margaret made on a reject pile was a life saved. Every shell she passed was a promise kept. Back in Kirkby, the numbers are staggering. The quota is not hundreds, it is not thousands. The Ministry of Supply demands millions. By 1944, the British Army is firing millions of shells a month. The sheer statistical probability of error is terrifying. If the defect rate is even 0.01%, that means thousands of duds, thousands of premature explosions, thousands of Macs not coming home. And yet, the women tap. They tap with a consistency that defies human fatigue. They are fighting a war against probability. As Mac loads the next round, oblivious to the manufacturing miracle in his hands, the scene shifts. The sound of the artillery fades, replaced once again by the clanking industrial hum. But now, the stakes are higher. The year is turning. The invasion of Europe is imminent. The stockpiles must be doubled. The speed of the conveyor belts at ROF Kirkby is increasing. Margaret is back at her bench. The air is hotter now. It is summer. The sweat makes the amatoll dust stick to her skin like a second layer. Her wrist is throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. The foreman dumps another crate of raw steel casings onto her table. "Faster, ladies," he barks, walking down the line. "General Montgomery needs these for the big push. Do not let him down." Margaret picks up the hammer. The rhythm restarts. Tap, ring, tap, ring. But something is changing in the factory. The demand for speed is introducing a new enemy, complacency. And in the corner of the workshop, a new batch of steel has just arrived from a supplier, pushing their furnaces too hard. The metal looks fine. But to the ear, Margaret strikes a shell. Cling, but the note wavers. It starts as a B-flat and dips, just slightly, into a minor key. It is not a thud. It is not a ring. It is something in between. A question mark in steel. She hesitates. The belt is moving. The foreman is watching. If she rejects it, she slows the line. If she passes it, Margaret strikes the casing a third time. Cling waver. It is not a dead thud. It is not a clear bell. It is a sound of uncertainty. In the binary world of war, where a soldier either lives or dies, uncertainty is a luxury nobody can afford. She grips the chalk. With a sharp, defiant motion, she slashes a white X across the steel flank. "Reject," she calls out, her voice cracking from the chemical fumes. Mr. Henderson is at her elbow in an instant. He smells of stale tobacco and anxiety. He picks up the rejected casing, weighing it in his hands. It looks flawless. The machining is smooth. The weight is correct to the ounce. "That looks like a pass, Margaret," he shouts over the din of the lathes. "We are 300 units behind for the afternoon train. If it rings, it goes." It did not ring. Margaret snaps back, not looking up, reaching for the next shell. It wheezed. Henderson glares at the chalk mark. He knows the Ministry of Supply inspectors are coming tomorrow. He knows General Montgomery is screaming for ammo in the staging grounds of Portsmouth. But he also knows that Margaret has the ear. He drops the shell into the reject bin with a heavy crash of metal on metal. "Speed it up," is all he says. This moment, repeated thousands of times across the factory floor, is the friction point of the war economy. It is the collision between the desperate need for quantity and the absolute necessity of quality. And the cost is being paid by the women. As the weeks grind on toward June 1944, the physical toll on the Canary Girls becomes impossible to ignore. You look at Margaret's hands. The yellow stain is not just on the skin anymore. It has soaked into the fingernails and the cuticles. It is in her bloodstream. The TNT is hepatotoxic. It attacks the liver. During the lunch break, you sit with them in the canteen. The chatter is subdued. A woman 2 tables over, a girl named Clara, who joined only a month ago, faints. She just slides off the bench, her tin mug clattering to the floor. Nobody screams. 2 matrons in white aprons rush over, lift her up, and carry her to the infirmary. The other women just watch, chewing their sandwiches slowly. They know why she fell. They know about the anemia and the jaundice. They know that some babies born to factory workers in this town are coming out yellow, but the bell rings. Lunch is over. The artillery does not wait for liver function tests. June 6, 1944. 600 hours. HMS Warspite, off Sword Beach. The result of their sacrifice is now floating in the English Channel. You are standing on the deck of the battleship HMS Warspite. The horizon is a grey smear of smoke and rain. To the south, the coast of Normandy is a thin line of terrified earth. The order is given, open fire. The main batteries erupt. But it is not just the battleships. It is the destroyers, the cruisers, and the landing craft gun vessels. It is the field artillery firing from the decks of landing ships. The air is physically torn apart. This is the creeping barrage, a wall of exploding steel designed to walk ahead of the infantry and pulverize the German defenses. Listen to the sound. It is a continuous, rolling thunder that creates a pressure wave strong enough to vibrate your diaphragm. Every single crump and boom in that cacophony represents a successful transaction between a woman in Lancashire and the laws of physics. If you could zoom in, slowing down time as a 15-inch shell arcs over the grey water, you would see the craftsmanship. You would see the casing holding together against the unimaginable G-forces of launch. You would see the explosive filler, packed by yellow-stained hands, remaining stable until the fuse strikes the German pillbox. Out of the millions of shells fired on D-Day, there are duds. It is inevitable. But there are remarkably few bore prematures. The guns keep firing. The barrels hold. The line holds. Back in Kirkby, the women do not know about the specific success of Sword Beach. They only know the radio announcements. They gather around the wireless during their breaks, heads bowed, listening to the BBC. Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. A cheer goes up, a ragged, exhausted cheer. But Margaret does not cheer. She is looking at her hands. She is rubbing her thumb against her forefinger, feeling the phantom vibration of steel. She is wondering how many of the boys storming those beaches are alive right now because she drew a chalk X on a piece of metal 3 weeks ago. The invasion succeeds, but the appetite of the beast only grows. As the Allies push inland, into the hedgerows of the bocage, the demand for shells triples. The factories run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The musicians are tapping in their sleep. They are tapping until their hearing is permanently notched, tuned only to the frequency of high-carbon steel. And then, the war throws a new challenge at them. A challenge that sound alone might not be able to solve. It is late 1944. The Germans are retreating, but their technology is evolving. Reports are coming back from the front about shells bouncing off the thicker armor of the new Panther and Tiger tanks. The standard high-explosive shell is not enough. The Ministry of Supply sends a new order to Kirkby, armor-piercing discarding sabot. These are different beasts. They are denser, harder, and more complex. And when Margaret taps the first one from the pilot batch, she frowns. Think. It is a higher pitch, sharper, more aggressive. It sounds like glass breaking. New composition, Henderson explains, dropping a stack of technical drawings on her bench. Tungsten carbide cores, harder than the devil's heart. If these crack, they do not just split, they shatter like crystal. Margaret grips her hammer. She has to relearn the music. She has to forget the song of the 25-pounder and learn the screech of the tungsten. She closes her eyes, isolating the sound, searching for the flaw in a material harder than anything she has ever touched. She taps. Think. Pass. She taps again. Think. Pass. She is learning the new language of destruction. But as she works, she coughs. A dry, hacking cough that rattles deep in her chest. The yellow dust is doing its work. She is saving the army. But who is saving her? May 8th, 1945. 1500 hours. Royal Ordnance Factory, Kirkby. The end of the war does not sound like a cheer. At least, not here. Not at first. It sounds like the flip of a switch. For 3 years, the factory has roared with a volume that rivals the artillery itself. The belts have ground, the furnaces have roared, and the hammers have tapped in a ceaseless, 24-hour percussion. But at 3 p.m., the main power lever in the control room is pulled down. The conveyor belt slows. The hum drops in pitch. And then, for the first time since 1939, the machine stops. The silence hits Margaret like a physical blow. It is louder than the noise. Her ears, attuned to the scream of metal, are ringing violently in the sudden vacuum. She is holding a hammer in mid-air, poised to strike a 17-pounder anti-tank shell. She lowers it slowly. She places it on the workbench. She looks up. Down the line, hundreds of women are doing the same. They look like statues carved from yellow stone. They are dazed. "It is over, love," Elsie says. Her voice sounds unnaturally loud in the quiet hall. Jerry has quit. Margaret does not scream. She does not dance. She is too tired. She simply unfastens her apron. She takes off the turban, revealing hair that is brittle and bleached a strange, brassy straw color. She touches her face. The yellow tint is fading slightly, but she knows the cough will stay. The doctors do not have a name for it yet, but 50 years later, they will talk about the liver disease and the respiratory failure of the Canary Girls as casualties of war, just as real as shrapnel wounds. She walks out of the factory gates. The streets are filled with bunting. People are dancing on the cobblestones. There is beer flowing, and music, real music, brass bands and accordions playing "We Will Meet Again." But Margaret hears a different tune. She looks at her hands. In her mind, she sees the pile of shells. 90 million. That is the estimated number of rounds produced and inspected by the British Ordnance Factories. 90 million chances for catastrophic failure. 90 million opportunities for a gun crew to die by their own hand. And how many burst? How many bore prematures were there? The statistics are miraculous. The failure rate was infinitesimally small. The British artillery became the envy of the world, not just for its volume, but for its reliability. And it was not due to computers. It was not due to lasers. It was due to the ear. It was due to the women who stood in the freezing cold, inhaling poison, tapping metal, until they found the one note that did not belong in the song. You watch Margaret merge into the celebrating crowd. She lights a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the clean May air. She will never touch a hammer again. She will go on to marry, to have children, and perhaps her skin will eventually return to its natural color. But she will carry the ghost of the factory forever. Whenever she hears a bell toll or a spoon drop on a tile floor, her head will turn. She will be listening for the ring. She will be checking the pitch. In the history books, they will list the generals. They will list the battles: Alamein, Monte Cassino, D-Day, the Rhine. They will talk about the strategy and the bravery of the men who pulled the lanyards. But you know the truth. You know that before the gun could fire, before the enemy could be broken, the victory had to be audited. It had to be listened to. The war was won by a symphony of destruction. But the conductor was not a general. It was a 22-year-old girl with yellow skin, sitting on a wooden stool, listening for the music of life in the metal of death. And she never missed a beat.